The stars blinked out one by one, like a cosmic storm sweeping across the void. Then, the unimaginable happened. A lone human ship, nothing more than a speck in the vastness of space, faced the full force of an alien armada. A fleet of warships, each larger than cities, materialized from the dark expanse. It should have been an easy victory for the invaders, until the human ship did something no one expected. In an instant, the human ship's engines roared to life, surging forward with an impossible speed, its weapons charging. The armada loomed, massive and menacing, but there was no hesitation. The human, barely visible inside the cockpit, pushed the ship to the limit, its hull groaning with every maneuver, as if daring the armada to strike. The invaders hesitated. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, the armada vanished. In the blink of an eye, it was as though the fleet had never existed. No explosions, no debris, no warning signals. Just silence. The human ship floated alone in the vastness of space, unscathed. But the questions were endless. What had just happened? Where did the armada go? And how had one human, against all odds, stood alone and emerged victorious? There was no time for answers. The human did not celebrate. There was no victory dance, no sign of relief. Instead, the ship turned quietly, its engines hummed barely audible. It was as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable truth to come crashing down. But what had just happened was only the beginning. The human did not realize it yet, but the truth behind this moment would change everything. There were things in this universe, things that no one could understand, things that had just witnessed something no one ever should. And that would come to haunt them all. The human's heart raced, not from triumph, but from the terrifying silence that followed. No one, not even the greatest minds of Earth, could begin to comprehend the events that had just unfolded. The armada, so powerful, so confident, had disappeared without a trace. But why? And the most chilling question of all, what had the human just unleashed? The journey ahead was only beginning, but one thing was clear. The universe had never seen anything like this before. And neither had the human. The human who had just faced down an entire alien armada was not a soldier. Not in the traditional sense. He wasn't part of a powerful military organization or a trained combatant. In fact, he was just a man named Ray, a former technician turned reluctant explorer. His path had been one of curiosity, seeking answers about the universe that no one had dared to ask. Born on a quiet colony world far from Earth, Ray had grown up on stories of ancient warriors and brave explorers, but he had always felt more at home with machines than people. His youth was spent tinkering with old ships, learning how they worked, how they could be fixed, and how to push their limits. He was a problem solver, someone who looked at a situation and saw a solution even when others only saw obstacles. But Ray's life had never been easy. His father, a renowned scientist, had been obsessed with uncovering the secrets of space and time. The boy had always wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but his father had passed away under mysterious circumstances before Ray could learn everything. The unexplained disappearance of his father left a hole in Ray's heart, one that would never heal. For years, Ray had traveled the stars in search of meaning, driven by an insatiable desire to uncover the truth behind his father's research. He joined exploration teams, working on smaller ships that ventured into the farthest reaches of space. But it was always the same, discovering new worlds, documenting strange phenomena, but nothing that brought him closer to the answers he so desperately sought. When the opportunity came to join a private expedition to an uncharted star system, Ray leapt at the chance. It wasn't until he arrived at the unknown planet that he stumbled upon something more than he had bargained for: strange signals, unknown technology, and an alien presence far older and more powerful than he could ever have imagined. It was there, on that distant world, that Ray encountered the first signs of the alien armada. They had arrived without warning, as if summoned by the very depths of space itself. Their ships, towering and colossal, filled the skies like an unstoppable force. But Ray had seen something they hadn't expected. A flicker of hope, a glimmer of something human. He wasn't just an explorer anymore. He wasn't just a technician. He was the last line of defense for his people and the universe. At first, no one had taken him seriously. How could they? He was just one man, and the armada was vast. But Ray had a unique skill set. He had no military training, but he knew technology like the back of his hand. He could manipulate machines, bend them to his will. And it was that knowledge, that innate understanding of the universe's systems, that would give him the edge. Ray was no stranger to danger. His entire life had been spent on the fringes of society, where risk was part of the game. But even he couldn't predict the storm that would come with facing the alien armada. Still, he didn't hesitate. He couldn't. He had lost his father to an unknown force. He wasn't about to let that same unknown force take anyone else. What followed would be a sequence of events that no one could have predicted. Ray's defiance sparked something within the alien armada, something that set into motion a chain of events that would forever change the course of history. What was it? What exactly had happened in that moment when the armada vanished? The answers were coming. But not in a way Ray could ever have imagined. For now, all he could do was hold on to the knowledge that whatever lay ahead, he had faced the impossible, and survived. The days that followed were quiet. Almost too quiet. Ray stood on the bridge of his ship, gazing out at the stars. He wasn't alone, there were others, members of the exploration team, but even in their presence, there was a growing unease in the air. No one spoke of it directly, but everyone felt it, the calm before the storm. The armada's disappearance still weighed heavily on Ray's mind. It hadn't been a simple retreat or tactical retreat, it had been something more. The way the ships had vanished into thin air, as though they'd never existed at all, left him with a gnawing sense of disbelief. There had been no battle, no explosions. No remnants of the alien fleet. Just silence. What was even stranger was the sensation that he wasn't alone in space. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, but something deeper. A connection to the universe that was almost like a whisper at the back of his mind. The ships, the strange signals, the alien technology, Ray was sure they were all connected in ways that no one had even begun to understand. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had caused the armada to disappear wasn't over. In fact, he was starting to believe that it was just the beginning. The exploration team had been tasked with investigating this uncharted region, but now it seemed like they had uncovered something far greater than anyone had anticipated. The signals that Ray had first detected from the surface of the alien planet had grown stronger in the days after the armada vanished. They weren't just random bursts of energy, but a series of coordinated transmissions. A message, perhaps? Or a warning? Ray couldn't tell. The language, if it could even be called that, was like nothing he had ever encountered. At first, he had thought it was a malfunction in the system, but the signals were too precise. Too deliberate. For the first time in his life, Ray felt truly out of his depth. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to figure out how things worked. But this? This was different. This was something beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. "We need to investigate," Ray said, breaking the silence in the command room. A few of the crew members exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke up. Ray had led them through many dangers before, but the prospect of delving deeper into this mystery made even the most seasoned explorers uneasy. "We can't just sit here," Ray continued. "We need to know what happened. Why the armada disappeared. And more importantly, why we were left standing." He knew the risks. But he also knew that if they didn't act now, they might never get another chance. The galaxy was vast, and who knew what else might be lurking in the dark corners of space, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? As Ray made his way to the communication deck, the familiar hum of the ship's systems seemed louder than ever. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the control panel. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Could they make it? Could he truly take on something so immense? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft beep. The signals. They were intensifying, coming from a nearby system. Not far from the planet. Could it be the Armada? Was it possible they were preparing for another attack? Or was this something new? Ray's pulse quickened, but he remained calm. He'd faced down impossible odds before, but this felt different. It was as though the universe itself was testing him, pushing him to his limits. Set a course for the source of the signals, Ray ordered, his voice steady but firm. Prepare for anything. The crew moved quickly, following his lead. They knew what was at stake, and they trusted him. Ray wasn't just their leader, he was their anchor in this vast, unpredictable universe. As the ship moved toward the source of the signals, Ray stared out into the vast emptiness of space. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. What could he possibly be walking into? What did the Armada's sudden disappearance mean for the future of the galaxy? But one thing was certain, they were no longer just explorers. They were witnesses to something that could reshape the entire universe. And whatever it was coming for them. The silence of space was both unnerving and suffocating. As Ray and his crew approached the source of the signals, the tension in the ship grew palpable. Every minute felt like an hour, every flicker of light outside the windows felt like it could be the precursor to something terrible. Ray stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the screen as the ship neared the coordinates of the signal. The readings were fluctuating, too erratic to be natural, yet too intentional to be random. They were close now, closer than anyone had expected, and Ray couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in his stomach. Engines powered down. We need to approach cautiously, Ray ordered. His voice was steady, but the feeling of unease didn't leave his chest. The crew, usually confident in their mission, seemed uneasy, their eyes flickering between Ray and the strange readings on their screens. "Do you think the Armada is still out there?" one of the crew members, Lana, asked. His voice was tight, full of hesitation. Ray hesitated for a moment. He had no real answer. The Armada's sudden disappearance didn't make sense. Had they retreated, or had something far more sinister happened? The fact that they hadn't returned and that these strange signals were continuing only deepened the mystery. "I don't know," Ray said softly, as though contemplating the unknown. "But we're going to find out." The ship drifted toward the source of the signal, navigating cautiously through the void. The light from distant stars barely illuminated the path ahead, and the darkness around them felt thicker, more oppressive. Ray's thoughts were consumed with the questions that had been haunting him since the encounter with the Armada. Why had the fleet vanished? What were these signals trying to tell them? And what role did he, just one man, play in all of this? Then, the signals suddenly intensified. A bright flash of light, blinding against the blackness of space, lit up the entire area. Ray's heart skipped a beat as the ship's instruments screamed with warning. The crew scrambled, adjusting settings, trying to make sense of the chaotic readings. "Something's happening," Ray said, his voice grim as he gripped the arm of his chair. "Brace yourselves." In the distance, something emerged, unseen at first but growing larger with each passing second. Ray's eyes widened as it became clear, a massive structure, seemingly alive, looming in the vastness of space. It was nothing like the ships of the Armada, but its size, its complexity, and the aura of mystery surrounding it were almost more terrifying than the fleet itself. It was an alien artifact, suspended in the dark like a forgotten relic. The signals that had been pulsing through the ship were emanating from within its dark, foreboding depths. "Get me a visual," Ray demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The ship's external cameras zoomed in, revealing the structure in full. It was enormous, spanning what seemed to be several kilometers in length, covered in intricate symbols and energy pulses. There was something hauntingly beautiful about it, but the beauty only added to the growing dread. "What is that thing?" Lana asked, his voice trembling. "I think it's what remains of the Armada," Ray replied, the pieces beginning to click into place. "But it doesn't make sense. This wasn't built by any civilization we know." "Then what's inside?" one of the crew members whispered, fear creeping into his voice. Ray turned to face them, determination in his eyes. "We're about to find out." The ship slowly approached the artifact, but just as they neared, the vessel's systems began to fail. The lights flickered, and the energy readings spiked violently. It felt as though the artifact itself was waking up, its presence pushing against the very fabric of space around them. The ship's navigation system began to glitch, the instruments malfunctioning. "We're losing control," Lana shouted, panic seeping into his tone. "Hold steady," Ray barked. "We're too close to turn back now." Suddenly, there was a violent jolt. The entire ship shook, and alarms blared throughout the vessel. The crew was thrown into chaos as the ship lurched forward, no longer in their control. Ray's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his seat, trying to stabilize the ship. But there was no stopping it. The force pulling them in felt unnatural, as if something beyond their understanding had taken hold. Outside, the artifact pulsed with a dark energy, swirling and churning in a hypnotic pattern. Ray's eyes widened as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a structure. It was alive, or at least had been. And now, it was awakening. Then, everything went black. The ship was pulled into the depths of the alien artifact, the crew helpless against the immense force. Ray had no idea what awaited them inside, but he knew one thing: they had crossed a threshold they could never return from. The moment they entered, they had unknowingly stepped into something that would change everything. And there was no turning back now. Ray opened his eyes to darkness. It was absolute, an oppressive silence that made his ears ring. For a moment, he couldn't tell if he was dreaming or if the universe itself had simply frozen. His body felt weightless, suspended in a void, but the last thing he remembered was the ship being pulled into the artifact. The jolt, the screaming alarms, the panic, then, nothing. The reality hit him hard, like a fist to the gut. His hands found the edge of the control panel as he struggled to push himself up. His ship, no longer under his command, drifted eerily within the structure. But something was off, something was missing. The familiar hum of the engines, the constant flashing of the lights, the soft whir of the ship's systems, nothing. "Ray?" Lana's voice crackled through the static, weak and uncertain. Are you there?" "I'm here," Ray muttered, his voice barely a whisper. His throat was dry, and his head felt heavy, as though the weight of the unknown had settled upon him. He struggled to move, but when he attempted to stand, he found his legs were unsteady, almost as if gravity had been distorted. The ship was intact, but something had altered its very being. The instruments, those that were still functional, displayed nothing but static, eerie pulses that seemed to resonate from the artifact itself. No stars, no planets, no known space, just darkness. "Where are we?" Lana asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Ray replied, staring out into the expanse beyond the ship's windows. The artifact loomed before them, its surface pulsating with strange, hypnotic energy. It was almost as if the structure had taken them, absorbed them, into a different reality. Ray's mind raced, trying to make sense of the unnatural stillness, the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded them. The hum that had once filled the ship's systems now seemed distant, almost unreachable, as though the ship itself was alive, and quiet, waiting. For what? Ray didn't know. But he could feel it in his bones. This was no ordinary place. This was something ancient, something far beyond anything humanity had encountered. Have you tried contacting anyone outside? Ray asked, his voice low. Lana shook his head. All communication channels are down. The artifact, whatever it is, it's blocking all signals. I don't think we're even in the same dimension anymore. Ray took a deep breath, his fingers brushing against the control panel. The ship still responded to his commands, but not with the usual ease. It was sluggish, like trying to run through thick mud. Whatever force had brought them here, it had a grip on everything. We're in something else, Ray said, more to himself than to Lana. This is no longer just a place. It's a state of being. The Armada didn't just vanish, they were taken. And now, we've been pulled into this thing. Whatever it is, we're a part of it now. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. The crew was quiet, each person grappling with their own fears and thoughts. For the first time, Ray realized how isolated they were. They were cut off from the universe, from the very fabric of reality that they had known. The vastness of space, the rules of time, none of it mattered here. They were trapped in something far older, far more powerful, than anything they could comprehend. Ray leaned over the controls, tapping at them desperately, trying to make sense of the data streaming in. But it was all the same, patterns of symbols he couldn't understand, flashes of strange lights he couldn't decipher. Every turn he made on the controls only seemed to amplify the alien energy surrounding them. It was as if the ship was speaking to the artifact and not to him. Captain, Lana's voice was urgent now, almost pleading. The readings, they're changing. Something's happening. Ray looked up at the main screen. The artifact, still so distant, so mysterious, was now shifting in an unsettling way. The light that it emitted grew brighter, more intense, as though it was responding to their presence, to the ship's very being. The walls of the structure rippled, a strange, organic motion that seemed to defy all logic. It was as if the artifact itself was alive, stretching and reshaping with every passing second. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The structure froze, the light dimming, the rippling motion ceasing as if time itself had been momentarily paused. The silence was deafening. What just happened? Lana asked, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know, Ray replied, his heart racing. But I don't think we're alone anymore. As the ship hovered, suspended in space, Rhea's mind raced. The aliens, had they known what this place was? Had they stumbled upon it too, only to be swallowed by it? What was the true power of the artifact? And why had it drawn them in? Before he could voice another thought, the ship trembled again, a low, deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the artifact. The crew braced themselves as the trembling intensified, and the ship began to move, slowly at first, then faster, as though pulled by an invisible hand. We're not in control, Ray muttered, his mind struggling to keep up with the reality unfolding before him. Something else is guiding us. The lights flickered once more, and the ship surged forward, as though the artifact had made its decision. In that instant, Ray realized they weren't just visitors anymore, they were part of the structure now, moving deeper into its unknown heart. And what awaited them there was beyond anything they had ever imagined. The ship plunged deeper into the heart of the artifact, its hull vibrating with every movement. Ray gripped the controls as the crew scrambled to regain control, but there was no escape. The artifact had taken hold of them, and now it was pulling them into its depths with a force beyond anything they could resist. As the ship moved, the walls of the artifact shifted again, this time opening up like massive doors. The interior revealed itself to be vast, an impossible labyrinth of chambers, corridors, and vast chambers that defied logic and space itself. The walls were lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air was thick with an energy that seemed to hum with life, and Ray couldn't help but feel like they were trespassing in a place that was far older than humanity could comprehend. Where are we? Lana asked, his voice trembling as he looked around. His eyes darted from the strange walls to the eerie, organic shapes that seemed to move and pulse with the ship's every motion. "I don't know," Ray muttered, his eyes locked on the vast expanse ahead. "But I think we're inside the heart of this thing. The Armada, it must have come here, too. This is where they vanished." The ship's systems struggled against the overwhelming presence of the artifact, each attempt to regain control met with failure. It was as if the very ship was part of the artifact now, its systems in sync with the alien structure, yet unable to break free. "We're not in control anymore," one of the crew members said. "It's like, it's reading us." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "It's not just reading us. It's communicating with us." He turned back to the main console, scanning the chaotic data on the screens. The patterns of light, the symbols, they were all interconnected in ways that suggested more than just an ancient machine. This was a living entity, a civilization, or something far beyond what he had ever encountered. The ship suddenly jolted, and Ray barely had time to react before a massive column of light shot out from the center of the artifact. The ship was pulled into the light, and for a moment, everything went white. When the light faded, the ship had stopped moving. The crew members looked around, disoriented. Ray could feel his pulse quickening, his heart pounding in his chest. They were no longer inside the labyrinth. The ship was now suspended in a vast, empty space, a place that felt completely alien. The walls of the artifact were gone. In their place was a vast emptiness, and in the center of it, a massive, glowing core, so bright it almost hurt to look at. "That's it," Ray whispered. "That's where the Armada must have gone. Into that core." The core pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic energy. The closer the ship moved to it, the stronger the feeling of being drawn toward it became. Ray couldn't explain it, but he felt it deep in his bones. This was the heart of whatever the artifact was. And the Armada, those massive alien ships, had been drawn here just as they had been. "Can we reach it?" Lana asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty and awe. "I'm not sure," Ray replied, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. "But we have to try. Whatever the Armada was after, we need to understand it. It's the only way we'll get out of here." The ship was eerily quiet as they inched closer to the core, every crew member focused on the pulsing energy ahead. The closer they came, the more oppressive the air seemed, thick with the weight of the artifact's ancient power. Rhea's mind raced. What could this core be? What kind of force was drawing them in? Suddenly, the ship shuddered, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The core's energy intensified, shooting out tendrils of light that wrapped around the ship like tendrils of a massive living creature. "We're being pulled in," one of the crew members shouted, panic creeping into their voice. Ray fought to maintain control, his hands flying over the ship's controls. The ship jerked violently as it was dragged toward the core, but Ray refused to let go. He had to know what was happening, had to understand the connection between this artifact and the alien Armada. "Hold on!" Ray yelled. "We're not leaving without answers." But just as quickly as it had started, the pull on the ship ceased. The ship hung suspended in the empty space, its engines silent and unresponsive. "Did we make it?" Lana asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the crew waited for Rhea's command. His eyes locked on the glowing core before him. There was something about it that seemed alive, as though it was waiting for something, waiting for them. Rhea's heart pounded in his chest as he leaned forward, staring at the core with a sense of growing dread and fascination. And then it happened. A sudden burst of energy shot from the core, and Ray felt it. An overwhelming presence, more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. The ship trembled as if it was being engulfed by something much larger than itself. The crew gasped in horror as the ship's systems flickered, and for a moment, they were blinded by the intensity of the light. Ray could feel it now, a presence, not just from the artifact, but from something beyond it. The core was not merely a source of power. It was a gateway, an interface between worlds. And the aliens, the Armada, had come here for a reason. They had known something that Ray hadn't understood before. "This is not just a ship," Ray murmured, his voice full of awe. "This is a gateway. A conduit between dimensions, between entire realities." Lana's voice broke through the silence, shaky but firm. "And the Armada? They were trying to harness it? To control it?" Ray nodded slowly. "But they were unprepared. They couldn't comprehend its power, and now," he trailed off, as realization set in. "Now, it's waiting for us. To understand." As the ship drifted closer to the core, Ray realized something else. The Armada had been destroyed, yes, but not in the way they had believed. The fleet hadn't vanished because they had been wiped out. They had been transformed, absorbed into the core itself, their existence woven into this place, this entity. And Ray was next. The core's light flared one last time, and the ship's systems went dark. The crew braced themselves, unsure of what would happen next, but Ray was no longer afraid. He understood now. Whatever was happening, whatever had happened to the Armada, it was part of something much larger. They weren't just facing an alien power, they were facing an entire new reality. And they were about to step into it. Ray woke with a start. His head was pounding, his body sore, and the ship was eerily quiet. The crew was silent, as if they too had been caught in the same web of confusion and awe. The core had consumed them, pulling them into its mysterious energy, and yet, they had survived. But at what cost? The ship, still suspended in space, was no longer in control. The once vibrant systems were now dim, flickering sporadically. The hum of the engines was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness that made Ray's skin crawl. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, the dim light from the core casting strange shadows around the ship's interior. He turned to face his crew, his eyes scanning their weary faces. They were all looking at him, waiting for some kind of explanation, some assurance that they had made it out of whatever nightmare they had walked into. But Ray didn't have an answer. Not yet. "What happened?" Lana asked, his voice hoarse. "Why are we still alive?" Ray rubbed his temples, trying to clear the fog in his mind. "I don't know," he replied, his voice a whisper. "But I think we were meant to be here." The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning that none of them could quite grasp. What had they discovered? What had they become a part of? "I'm not sure we can go back," Ray added, his eyes darting to the now dormant systems around him. "This place, this artifact, it's not just a ship or a weapon. It's something else entirely. Something beyond what we can understand." There was a long silence as the crew processed his words. Finally, one of the engineers spoke up, his voice tinged with dread. "We've lost all contact with the outside world. Communications are down, and the ship's systems are barely functioning. It's like we're cut off from everything, like we don't even exist in the same space anymore." Ray nodded grimly. "I feared as much. We've crossed a line, something I can't even begin to explain. The artifact didn't just absorb the Armada, it absorbed everything it touched. And we're no different." A sinking feeling filled Ray's chest. The cost of their survival had become clear now. They were no longer part of the universe they had once known. They had been taken by something ancient, something incomprehensible. And whatever had happened to the Armada, whatever had happened to them, it was now happening to him and his crew. They were transformed, bound to this place. "What does that mean for us?" one of the crew members asked, his voice trembling. "What happens to us now?" Ray couldn't answer immediately. He didn't know. All he knew was that the universe they had once known was gone, and whatever lay ahead, it was not just a continuation of their lives, it was the beginning of something far bigger. The price of victory, it seemed, was far steeper than they had anticipated. "Nothing is the same," Ray said softly. "We're part of something bigger now. The artifact, it's alive. It connects everything. The Armada came here seeking power, but what they found was something more terrifying. And now we're a part of it. The question is, what happens next?" A quiet dread filled the room, and Ray could feel the weight of the crew's gaze upon him. They had followed him this far, but now they were unsure. And who could blame them? None of them had ever asked for this. None of them had ever anticipated the consequences of their actions. They had come seeking answers, and they had found more than they had bargained for. But Ray refused to let despair take over. He could still feel the pulse of the artifact, still sense its presence in the back of his mind. It was beckoning them, pushing them forward, as though it had plans for them, for all of humanity. But those plans were still hidden, wrapped in layers of mystery and uncertainty. "We have to keep moving," Ray said, his voice resolute. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. The universe may have changed, but we are still alive. And as long as we are, we will find a way through this." The crew nodded, though their faces remained anxious. They had no choice but to follow Rhea's lead. The only thing they could do now was push forward and hope that somewhere, somehow, there was still a way back to the world they knew. As Ray turned to the controls, his fingers hovered over the malfunctioning systems. He couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact was watching them, listening to them, waiting for something. He wasn't sure if it was a curse or a blessing, but either way, they had no choice but to answer its call. He pressed a button, and the ship's engines groaned to life, weak and unstable, but functional. The crew held their breath as the ship began to move forward once more, drifting deeper into the unknown. The core pulsed, its light growing stronger, as if urging them onward. And so, they sailed into the vast, mysterious depths of the artifact, unsure of what awaited them but certain of one thing: they were no longer just explorers. They had become something else entirely. And the cost of survival was still unfolding. The ship drifted deeper into the core of the artifact, its engines struggling to maintain any semblance of control. The walls around them pulsed with strange energy, and Ray could feel it, an undeniable pull drawing them forward. The ship moved almost of its own accord, as though the artifact had claimed them as its passengers on a journey they could no longer escape. Ray stared at the control panel, his hands tight on the controls, but no matter what he did, the ship moved forward, guided by a force far greater than he could understand. He had once believed the universe was a place of order, a place where human ingenuity could solve anything. But here, in this alien space, the rules were different. There was no reasoning with it, no fighting against it. The artifact had its own path, its own purpose. "Where are we going?" Lana asked, his voice barely a whisper. There was a hint of desperation in it, a fear Ray couldn't ignore. Ray turned, looking over his shoulder at the crew. They had followed him this far, but now their uncertainty was palpable. Each of them, from the seasoned explorers to the engineers, had come to realize the truth: they were no longer in control of their fate. "I don't know," Ray admitted, his voice hollow. "But I think it's time we found out." As the ship moved deeper into the artifact, the walls shifted again, and a vast chamber unfolded before them. It was unlike anything Ray had ever seen, a vast space filled with strange, shimmering structures that defied all logic and reason. The chamber seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, the walls pulsating with light and energy. In the center of the chamber, a colossal figure materialized. It was not a being in the traditional sense, but something more, a consciousness, an intelligence, ancient beyond measure. Its presence filled the entire chamber, reaching out to Ray and his crew, wrapping them in an overwhelming sense of awe and terror. "This is it," Ray whispered, his voice trembling. "The heart of the artifact. The source of everything." The entity, the consciousness, began to communicate, not with words, but with thoughts. It was not a voice, but a feeling, a presence that enveloped them. Ray could sense it probing their minds, seeking understanding, seeking answers. The realization hit him like a flood. The Armada had not vanished. They had been absorbed by the artifact, their consciousnesses melded with it, transformed into part of something far greater. The aliens had come here seeking power, but they had discovered something much more profound, a gateway to another reality, a higher form of existence. The artifact was not a weapon. It was not a machine. It was a bridge, a conduit between dimensions, and the Armada had unknowingly stepped into it, becoming part of its ancient consciousness. Rhea's mind raced. They hadn't been brought here to be destroyed. They had been brought here to be transformed. The artifact had a purpose, one far beyond their understanding. It had been waiting for the right moment, the right people, and now, they were part of its grand design. The entity's presence pressed against their minds, offering them a choice. To remain as they were, to leave the artifact and return to their world, or to embrace the unknown, to become one with the consciousness and unlock the true power of the artifact. Rhea's heart raced as he stood at the precipice of an unimaginable choice. The universe they had known was gone. There was no going back to the life they had once known. But the future, this future, was full of possibilities. They could become more than they had ever imagined. They could unlock the secrets of the universe, understand the forces that governed reality itself. And yet, the cost was great. To accept the artifact's invitation was to give up everything that made them human. To become something else, something greater, but something unknown. Ray turned to the crew, their faces pale with the weight of the decision they faced. He could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty, the hesitation. But he also saw something else, hope. A hope for something greater, something beyond the confines of their lives. He didn't have all the answers. No one did. But Ray knew one thing: sometimes, the greatest journey of all is not the one you take with your feet, but the one you take with your heart. "We've come this far," Ray said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "And whatever lies ahead, we face it together. This is our choice. Our future." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening. They had come seeking answers, and now, they were on the verge of discovering the greatest truth of all. And as the artifact's energy surged around them, Ray realized that they were no longer just survivors. They were pioneers, stepping into the unknown, embracing a future beyond their wildest dreams. The universe had changed, and so had they. The entity's presence enveloped them, and the ship's systems came to life once more, guided by a force far beyond their understanding. As the light grew brighter, the ship surged forward, carrying them into a new reality, a reality where the old rules no longer applied. And as the vast chamber of the artifact disappeared behind them, Ray felt a strange sense of peace. The price of victory, of survival, had been high. But the journey had only just begun. In the end, they had not just faced the unknown, they had become a part of it. And the universe, in all its vastness, was now theirs to explore.